First of all, please tell us your name and who you are, where you were born, what date you were born, and so forth. Give us a few details where your family comes from and where you live today. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of this truth commission, the truth, the story, the narrative that you can tell us from your point of view. No, he's without a mic. No.
Oh, it's working.
My name is Michael Cohen, known as Mickey, a native of Israel, 84 and a half years old. On my mother's side, I'm a sixth-generation native Israeli to a family that immigrated from Morocco in 1740. My father was born in Germany, immigrated to Israel in 1921. I was raised in Tel Aviv. I was born in Tel Aviv and raised there. And after finishing my schooling, I served in the Palmach forces. And maybe we can talk about that a bit later, I don't know. It's important, I think, to note one more thing relating to my family. My grandfather, Yosef Eliyahu Shlush, wrote in 1931-32 a book called The Story of My Life, a kind of autobiography of sorts. And in the last chapter of his book, where he deals with the relations between Jews and Arabs, he writes everything sort of in a nutshell, all of the entire philosophy. And he says, for those who came to us from near, learn the Arab language, learn the Arab culture. The bayonets of the British cannot maintain a country, and things of that nature. Who is the woman who spoke before me? Safa. Safa Bourabir, the woman who spoke before me. Yeah, just as the woman who spoke before me talked about the generational transition of insights and awareness in regards to place, so she has another partner. I am as such as well. By the way, I would like to tell this woman, Safa, if she's still in the room, that for me, she is equal in every sense of the word. At least she's equal to me. I can only talk on behalf of myself. Maybe she's even better than me, actually, because this ability to accomplish a PhD on a subject which is so complex certainly means that she deserves she deserves kudos for that. Okay, well, we're going to ask you now, please, since this Truth Commission deals and specifically with the events of 1948 to 1960, in the Negev region, in the south, we ask you to tell us about your participation, your memories of what exactly you did, where you were. What can you tell us, to the best of your recollection, about what happened? First of all, let me just sort of set boundaries, because things have been said thus far that are far beyond my scope, okay? I can talk about 1948. I can't talk about 1960, not in this context. If you could just hold the mic. I can talk about the Negev, but not about the South, all of the South. I can talk about the northern part of the Negev, not so much about the Arava, which is the southern part of the Negev, because that's a different story entirely. I can talk about what I can talk about, which is where I was and so forth. Okay. Everything that I will say on the basis that I was asked to give testimony in these issues during the 1948 war, the Independence War, according to our version, and the Nakba War, according to the Arab version. By the way, there's no problem. The joy of one is the distress of another. That's how it works. So we can address that. That's the truth, a common truth. I am part of a generation which is known as the 1948 generation. Not somebody who's born in 1948, but rather somebody who experienced the generation that experienced that period of time of the pre-state era, the fight for national sovereignty in the land of Israel, the pogroms and massacres that were conducted on the Jews, the war that happened in 1958. This is one overall experience, seminal experience, that in brief is called the 1948 generation. And one has to understand that the people of the 1948 generation, from the day they were born and onwards, constantly were fed on the notion of the dream. You can call it the Zionist dream, you can call it the Jewish dream if you want, I don't know, that there will be a state here, an independent state, and that we must prepare ourselves for all of the tests that will be done, that will test us until we manage to get to that dream. And by the way, let no one misunderstand, we didn't know when this would happen, but we were raised, and if you want, you can say we were, according to the, the story of Isaac in the Bible, we knew that this is our destiny. And as known to maybe many of the people here, I don't know, at least some of them, we as the 1948 generation that that served in the Haganah movement, and also then in the Palmach underground movement, and some of them also in the Polshim, it was absolutely something that we accepted and took for granted. Nobody had to motivate us. The determination to take upon yourself the responsibility to do whatever is possible to make this dream a reality was true. It wasn't a sacrifice. It wasn't some sort of courageous feat. This is what we were educated for. And when the test came, we did it as we took it for granted, that it needed to be done. When the events began in November, the strife and conflict between the two groups worsened, between the Arabs and the Jews, between the Arab settlements and the Jewish settlements. The Jewish settlements towards the 14th, we were about 630,000 people in Israel. And the Arabs, well, there are inaccurate numbers about the Arabs, maybe twice as much the Arabs. Nobody knows for sure about the number of Arabs. The Jews are a total minority, even also during the famous civil war. That same war, those same fights that were conducted between the 29th of November and the 15th of May until the day of the invasion.
אתה מוכרח, אולי את תשבי ותחזיקי לו את המיקרופון.
היישוב היהודי בארץ ישראל, זה מתאים לסבתא שלי, לא לי. אוקיי. היישוב מנה 630.
We were 630, the Arabs were 630. The Arabs were not, were half, were more, was twice perhaps.
וללא כל...
There was no doubt that the Jewish population was inferior in terms of numbers, obviously, but also inferior in terms of the number of weapons for self-defense. And in the first part of the war, of the 1948 war, called by many the Civil War, the Arabs of Israel fought amongst themselves. They got, they were getting a bit of support from various gangs, Shakli and a few others, but mostly it was a fight for the roads and of specific settlements, with a hope to, apparently, I think, to establish an Arab state. Some people at least wanted that. At the head of the Bada Bufti in the Jerusalem propaganda there, at least one or two countries, Arab countries, also sent mercenary troops to the Negev region. In the Negev, 3-4 months before the outbreak of war, two Muslim Brotherhood brigades were sent here. Trained soldiers of the Muslim Brotherhood, armed with new modern British weapons, with a hierarchical structure, with commanders. And they were the ones who began the attacks on the Arab settlements, on Dirim, on Yad Mordechai, the Jewish settlement, on Kfar Darom. These troops were also the ones who invaded into the lands, into the boundaries of this area. When did you get here? Let me just conclude one tiny thought and I'll answer you. On the 15th of May, when 6 armies of 6 Arab countries invaded the land of Israel, meaning traversed international boundaries. The Egyptian army, obviously, which divided into 2 branches. The Egyptians divided their forces, divided one which went north to Rehovot, Tel Aviv area. In Egypt, there was also they had already published a series of stamps where they see the Egyptian army conquering the city of Tel Aviv, and the second Egyptian military branch, which went along Oj el Khafir, all the way to Bethlehem, south of Hebron, in order to pressure Jerusalem. And there are those that say we're attempting to steal the win from the Jordanians. Mickey, since we don't have a lot of time, and we really want to hear your story, what happened to you, not history of the Independence War, okay? Which is something that we'll have to study, obviously. But your personal story of your participation in the battles in the South. So where did you arrive? What battles did you participate in? What happened? Okay. I was enlisted to the Palmach, meaning we were a small group of troops that lives on a kibbutz. A kibbutz where you both work and train in order to live your life. And in regular days, after you did your agricultural work, you protected the settlements. We came with the last wave during the days of the war. Our school days were shortened by a few months. I was in my 12th grade of school, and we began training in the school. We were a big unit overall in the Schiller group. And very quickly, after a month maybe, the fights in the Negev broke out, and there wasn't enough personnel, and they established basically a new company in the 7th Brigade, and we were basically the heart of this unit. By the way, during the days of the battle, so as you understand, we're not talking about the brigades of today, and we're not talking about the companies of today. We're talking about small groups, 30% of what you would consider a platoon, a company, a brigade today. We're talking about small numbers of people. I began a commander's course, then I went back to the Negev and commanded over my friends, basically. And then the events became more and more complicated. As Safa called them, the falachs, meaning the members of the Arab villages who worked the land, but also the concentration of the Bedouin tribes in the south. Three tribes particularly, they were motivated by the Jerusalem Mufti and the Egyptian military forces that had already invaded Israel, and they were told and encouraged to sabotage the Jewish settlements. At the time, there were 26 Jewish settlements. It's important to understand such a settlement was between 30 Jews to 40, 50 Jews.
With women and children, of course, as well. And so their aim was to actually harm these villagers, actually violate their kind of stability. There were 2 oil pipes that came out of Nir Am that emanated from there. Sorry, not oil pipes, water pipes. To the local Arabs, and every single day they used to actually sabotage the pipes, either by shooting at them or exploding them, or even pinching and stealing some of the pipes. So this was an extremely interesting kind of period wherein our command in those days, the Haganah, reached an agreement with the Muhtars from the various village, in other words, the leading elders, and wherein there were specific pipelines created that actually led the water to the villages, and that way they reached an agreement for an entire 3 weeks when they didn't actually damage the pipes, until the muhtars from the villagers, from the Arab villages, started infighting between themselves, and then the Palmach combatants in the Negev had to start driving alongside the 2 sides of the pipes from morning till night in order to prevent any and thwart any attack against the pipelines. And that we had welders with us, and we used to stop and repair it, because that was our water. That was really the essence of life. And of course, participated in all these events, including the attacks against Arab villages that were hostile, especially those along the axes of movement, the main arteries. Undoubtedly, in our heart, we believe that that was what we had to do. We didn't do it because it was we were coerced to do. What didn't you do that you were coerced to do? To attack these Arab villages, because we believed that we were doing the right thing, and to exert an effort to expel the actual population, because we had to ensure that the main arteries of transport, either for supplies or if it was for the evacuation of injured people, we had to keep it like that. And it wasn't they kept actually, so we had to ensure it somehow. And how did we do it? It's very unpleasant to say. We had to clean that area of any possible threat. Can you describe one of those specific attacks on a village and the cleaning of the field up? Believe me, I will go back to it. At any rate, I said that our objective on the Arabs of the villages, even before the Egyptian army started invading and attacking ground attacks, the Negev Arabs that was sort of bordered between the Ashkelon-Fallujah axis and Darich Bir Asluj, and a little more southward from that, about 50 or 60 villages. They were harassing the Jewish villagers and the Palmach. That was part of their objective. That was the objective that they were told. That's the command that they were given. So one of the headquarters of the Haganah said a number of things. Program D, which followed Program C of the command, the higher echelons of the Haganah, before the Arab armies were about to invade. And could you give us the date a little bit for this? It was March. I would say the end of March, if I'm not mistaken. So this Program D said no more, no less, that territories that are within the framework of the Jewish state, the declared Jewish state, wherein Arabs are settled, either rural settlements or not, that are attacking or preventing our forces, our battalions or our companies defending Israel, there is a permit to expel, not to actually expel, he's correcting himself, but to evacuate them. And that was completely clear-cut, and it was black on white. I'm not even going to philosophize about it. Even if someone doesn't understand that, read the history books. Read it. It's written. So what did we do? So in the actual Negev brigade, they started giving commands that were connected to this program D, because the soft belly of the Negev was within a space at a certain area that I'd say the order of magnitude of 10,000, 15,000 Arabs, and only a few Jews. And the Arabs during that period were extremely active in actually harming and hurting these Jewish settlers. And were there those who resisted? Well, there was a phenomenon, and I heard my friend, and he didn't know how to answer it, but I can answer undoubtedly because I have documentation. I have been researched. I'm a kind of pseudo-researcher of history, and I have published a book with some of my friends called The Negev Brigade during the War of Independence. So one of the commanders of a company during that time, as part and parcel of Program D, they actually resisted and they objected. They said, we don't want that. We don't want to do that. Ultimately, they all did. But it wasn't a kind of sort of clear-cut, unequivocal, yes, Mr. Prime Minister. There was a very vehement argument amidst them because they thought that it was inhuman. But unfortunately, in my opinion, there wasn't any other solution. But there were really expressions in writing to that objection, to that resistance. I'm not trying to sort of beautify things and embellish them, but I'm just telling you all these as facts. I'd also like to mention something else in hindsight. In order to remove any doubt from the fact that the evacuation of these villages in the Negev was because of the diseases that Israeli society was sick of, which is to occupy territories because of some kind of stupid precept and then they just remain there. No, that was not the situation. That was not the example. It wasn't colonialism, in other words, or imperialism. But in most of those rural villages that were evacuated during the War of Independence, there are no settlements there. There weren't new ones established instead of them. And it wasn't something we got them out and brought Jews in. That wasn't the idea at all. But there was a unique example during the War of Independence, and that it was a necessity, a crucial necessity, because at the crossroads of Brer, Broheil, they were really harassing and attacking the transport in a perpetuative manner. They kept doing so. They decided to conquer, to really take over that village, and a unit from Battalion 2, from the Negev Battalion, they sort of held it like an outpost. And then they turned it into a kibbutz in 1949, and it received the status of a kibbutz. That is one of the most salient examples, but very isolated examples, wherein an Arab village was conquered, taken over, evacuated, and was then resettled by Jews. But it was one of the isolated examples, and I participated in some of the very harshest of battles. For example, Cholkat, where there was so many fatalities there. And it was also a very big village, and they had a sort of control of the whole area, because that kind of area was actually sort of a wilderness, other than a commemoration for 23 people who died there as a monument there. Can you tell me a little bit about Beersheba? That in your testimony we spoke about Beersheba, and there was something that wasn't totally clear to the members of the commission who read it, vis-a-vis the shooting in order to prevent people run away. Why preventing people running away? Could you explain it to us, clarify it? If you're holding it, I don't need to hold the microphone. Okay. Well, I think that the highlight of the War of Independence in the Negev was the occupation, or the conquering of, and if you're asking yourselves, why am I using the word conquering or occupation, and in Hebrew it's the same word, then if you suspect why I'm using that word in the Commission Truth, Beersheba was the only place that we did conquer, because it wasn't on the Jewish state's map. Now you all know that? Well, if you didn't, now you know. Beersheba was conquered. All the other places we sort of took over, but we didn't conquer. That was the highlight. And why? There were two main reasons for that. During the Yoav mission, from October, sort of mid-October onwards, the general staff and anyone who needed to, they understood that they wouldn't be able to actually conquer Gaza and therefore to lose, that there should be bloodshed and shoot at people there. They didn't want that to happen, and thus topple the Egyptian army. So they decided that they would actually conquer Beersheba, where the headquarters of the eastern front of the Egyptians was seated. And by thus doing, they would confuse the enemy. And that's what they did. So on the 20th of October, in a very sort of specially planned strategic step. Before that, there was a siege that they managed to break through the siege near Holkat, and the Negev brigade managed to break through. It was, by the way, the Negev, and it wasn't the 8th Brigade, it was the Negev one with parts. On the 20th of October, we attacked, and we did conquer Beersheba. Now, in Beersheba was the regional headquarters of the Egyptian army. There was 1,500 Egyptian soldiers in a battalion and about 4,000 civilians. 3 days before that conquest, our very heavy bombarders, aerial bombardment, if you could call them heavy, but in those days it was considered. So for 3 days they bombarded Beersheba, and then the Negev battalion actually went in with their ground forces. And according to our evaluation, we believe that half of that population had actually managed to escape during the bombardment, and also because of the rumors that had been spread that there was going to be a ground attack. So I was actually in a company that was sitting on the shoulder of Beersheba, that was looking out to the western southern valley of Beersheba, sort of towards the west, all the way. It becomes Wadi Aza, the Gaza Valley later on, in other words, towards the sea. And our mission was, there was a reasonable possibility that there would be a counterattack against us. So our mission was that with our rifles that we had and those machine guns, we have to prevent people moving from the town towards the west. Yes, and there are people who saw a film that my daughter prepared in a documentary. She asks me, and I said, yes, we shot. But what do you mean you shot at people? And I said, well, first, of course, and foremost, we shot because there were no more soldiers. The soldiers had removed their uniforms and ran away. So we couldn't identify whether they were civilians or soldiers because they removed their uniform deliberately. But we didn't actually go into all that at the time. We're talking about the sort of the core and the pith of the battle. We're talking about peak battle time. And in that storm of battles, it's not a good place for people or pacifists. Unfortunately, we did. We shot and we killed, or at least more than anything, what we were trying to do was actually prevent their flight. The Truth Commission would like a few clarification questions because we're slightly delayed, but I think that it is worthy because such a lesson on the War of Independence, this is a historical background, which is a first witnessed. We're talking about a first generation 1948 fighter. I think for me the whole thing is very clear. I have no questions, said the lady on the stage. In order to actually collect questions, I need a piece of paper and a pen. No, we'll do one question at a time. Mickey, in his testimony, he actually also added part of his vision, and if we haven't got time, then we'll see it in writing and we'll try and publish it. I would like to hear This is a truth commission. Could you please say your names? Shachta Ibn Bari. I would like to know a little bit more details rather than these general descriptions. For example, my first question is, when did you first go into Beersheba after the aerial bombardment? There were 3 days, according to your testimony, of an aerial bombardment. Half the people ran. They took flight in the western direction, and if they couldn't, then you shot at them, so they could only actually flee eastward. Ask, don't tell me, because the answer is no, says the person on the says the witness. Excuse me, I will explain. The battle on Beersheba took from 3 a.m., wherein the surrender of the Egyptian front came out with his white flag at 9:15. He came out from the police headquarters. 7.5 hours. But they had already ran 3 days beforehand during the bombardment and during the battle. They were fleeing. Which battle are you talking about? There was first a bombardment, yes, and then afterwards you came in with the French. With who? The French commando. Where did you get that from? What do you mean together? The French commando was a unit of our Negev brigade. Yes, together. You came on from the west and from the north. Yes. From the Mishmar Negev direction only. No, only from the north. Through the Muslim cemetery we came in. No, literally through it, from the north. There was a kind of a new neighborhood north of Beersheba, and we went through it, and we went into the Muslim cemetery, and from there into the town, not from the west. So how did you get to that wadi, to that valley, where people wanted to flee to? Where did they want to flee to? In which direction? I don't think that it'll interest everyone, but I'll answer you. We should have had a map here with the background, by the way, of the Zochot brochure is an aerial photograph of October 1948. It was one that I took, that I sort of supplied to them. We outflanked Beersheba, and we went up onto the actual hilltop, and from there you could see things beautifully on one of those sort of crooked turns in the Beersheba Wadi. That's what I'm saying, that they couldn't run, they couldn't flee westwardly, but only eastwardly. Look, forgive me. Do you want me to do it with a magnifying glass? I mean, what is the aim of the question? Please, if you could try and sort of explain. I can't give you precise figures. They flew, they ran to Hebron and Debron and all the various directions they were fleeing to. There was a kind of tendency and a thought that most of the people would run alongside the Wadi, the value, because it's like a road, if you know it. It's like a really quite sort of, it's a bit like a highway in a way. It's quite a wide road, and all the other directions were very difficult. But if it makes any difference to you, yes, but when you were shooting at people, did you know how many people were killed in the Wadi? No, no, no. But I can say to you that in the battle on Beersheba, there were very few Arabs killed. I can't give you figures. I don't know the figures, but very few. And when I say very few, I'm not talking about hundreds. We're talking about dozens. Yes, dozens of people were killed. And vis-a-vis the population that was left behind or stayed behind or that didn't have a chance to go, what did they do with them? They created a kind of encampment and just sort of southern part of Beersheba. The first few days they were in the town, and then a few days later they created a kind of encampment where they transferred them to, because we found out that quite a lot of them, there were people in uniform, in fact, in other words, who were trying to transfer all sorts of intel. So they took them out of in other words, all the men, or men and women as well. You know what? I can't actually tell you, but I think it was women too. And I would like to add to that that a few dozen of those were brought every day from the encampment to Beersheba in order to vacate the sort of what was destroyed there. In other words, the remnants and remove all the relics there. Now, where was this kind of encampment? It was 2 or 3 kilometers south Beersheba. I can't tell you the specific location. Were there other such places where people were concentrated, like in the mosque? You're leading me to where you want to lead me to. Okay, fair enough. I'll answer you. During. I think we met this gentleman. He's also a litigator, if you wanted to know. Yes, we're good friends already. We know how to talk to each other. During that, those 6-7 hours of the battle for Beersheba, I think we took about 115 prisoners that were in uniform. I can't tell you if they were soldiers, officers, but they were uniform wearers. And they were taken into, he's using a word like an encampment, and it was in the courtyard of the big mosque. And you want to hear, but you didn't say what you want to hear, and I will tell you. Yes, 2 of the Negev battalion soldiers who you were trying to, the French were angry that they had some of their people killed. So they, by the way, 2 of them threw grenades into not 200 and not 10, maybe 2 to 4. I'm not saying that terrible that those 4 people was not a great loss, but it wasn't more than 4 people who were killed in the mosque. So the 2 people were court-martialed, and they were completely sent away. No, what he is saying is that those 2 soldiers who had shot or sold a grenade, they didn't go into the mosque, by the way. There were 2 encampments. One was in the courtyard and one south Beersheba. I'm talking about the civilians, the Ashur family in Beersheba civilians. Do you know anything about their fate? No. You used the word gangs in your testimony, and that's a word that children learn in schools when it's something negative. You say, this was the Haganah, and they were gangs in your written documentation. So first of all, I accept your criticism. Yes, you could call them perhaps, you are right, you can call it a rescue army, and that kind of structuring in the educational ministry is definitely is something not necessary, totally unnecessary. I stand corrected. It shouldn't be used, that word gangs. He's going to translate that into Hebrew in a moment. So forgive me, he's going to translate it himself. You said that you participated in the cleaning of the the field. Could you give me concrete examples of how this took place, this vacating, this cleaning up of the villages? Was it with shooting, killing people? I will clarify. I cannot give you precise figures, but just so that you understand what we're talking about, not only here, but already in the preparations, people keep telling me which village, what happened, where did they come out of, where did they go into. Dear friends, in the Negev space, most of the village they vacated, they actually already left because the village it wasn't a whole collection, it was during the attack. Wait a second, what do you mean, how? Because when you attack a village and you shoot, some people are killed and some flee. It was most of the villagers in the Negev, but there were villagers that were evacuated, yes, in an elegant way. And one of them, and that keeps being repeated, Huj, that village, Huj, where Arik Sharon's ranch is and where I resided in the sands of that valley, sitting there for over 6 months. There was an example. Huj was a village that was in friendly terms with all the kibbutzim around them, and not just any kind of friendship. They used to buy and sell and really did sort of commercial ties and friendly ties, but for the same reasons that I mentioned beforehand. It was necessary to evacuate them because they were literally on our soft belly. But exactly from where I was and my unit was positioned, every morning the people from Huj, well, not a couple of times a week, there were mines and there was sabotaging. It was from somewhere close. We knew that they hadn't come in from Hebron. So every morning at 7 a.m., 4 Spitfires, the Egyptian Spitfires, would come over because they had kind of total aerial supremacy. Total supremacy. We didn't have any airplanes. They were down in their sorties and bomb us. And some of our clothes, you could see where they were hanging up on the line. They had holes in them from the bombs and from the cannons of the Egyptian Spitfires. So the Huj village people came to them beforehand, to the Egyptians, and said, listen, we've got to be evacuated to a safe place. So they were led without one shot into Gaza. When you say led them, yes, I accompanied them into Gaza without one shot fired. And it wasn't that distant, by the way, a distant spot. Can you also relate to whether you participated in the prevention of people coming back? That's a very interesting issue, that return to the villages. And I didn't actually mention that or talk about it.
There was something that continued throughout the war and after. First of all, there was one key important fact, that while leaving the villages, not everybody took their possessions. They took what they could take at the time. So people would infiltrate back into the villages to take what they'd left behind, the other stuff. Then there was another phenomenon. Tell him I'm older than him. Sheikh, please be nice to our witness. This phenomenon was also very interesting. There were villages that when they were left, there was still fruit on the trees, there were crops in the field, so they would come back to reap the crop not once, but also several months later. So there was a return to the villages. It can be attributed maybe to what we heard from my colleague, the Dr. Safa, who
אבל הם רצו דברים, מזון וחפצים.
So they came back for mostly food, possessions as well. Generally, I don't know how to. Did I shoot or not shoot? I can talk about. I don't know who shot. I can talk about me. Mostly, they would infiltrate back to their villages at night. You didn't witness shooting? That kind of shooting? No, I did not witness. I saw a lot of guns being fired, but you didn't see being infiltrators, as you call them, being shot? Let me just please conclude my thought and just finish it. So this is a phenomenon that was very interesting, I think, and very human. Had I met these Arabs coming back to the villages, I would have helped them get their stuff. I would have helped them. But this was something, it's also included in the literature later. And here I'd like to make an observation of my own. The war concluded sometime in 1949, and then there was began a battle for the borders in the Negev. To the east, in the Duema area, Hebron area, and then of course in Gaza, along the Gaza Strip. And we, the Israeli public, we constantly read in the media, newspapers, infiltrators coming in, trying to kill, but that wasn't the case. The actual truth was that those infiltrators in the first half of 1949, which was massive, many Arabs trying to come in and out. And then there was the second kind, which were people who crossed the entire Negev region all the way to Gaza, and from Gaza to Hebron. But they were coming to survive. They were coming to look for food, to get trade, to bring from their villages stuff that had been left behind. We, of course, Israeli pride being what it is, would never admit that that's the case. And we said that these are infiltrators, but that wasn't the truth. These people were coming back for food and belongings and so forth. That was something that happened after the war. That was after the ceasefire, where there were ostensibly, so to speak, permanent borders. Was there looting, and did you participate in looting? In Beersheba, there was looting. It was the first time that I actually witnessed looting. Some of the people, at least, were put to trial. The commander of the brigade, Nahum Sarig, the brigade commander, half a day after the occupation, closed all of the gateways to Beersheba with military police, and any vehicle leaving the city was dismantled into pieces to see if the people had been looting and taking stuff out of the city. But up until that day, yes, there was looting in Beersheba, and I have my own stories, bad stories. One friend of mine, a good friend of mine who was there, says that he was crossing the street in Beersheba with a box full of coins that he had taken from one of the stores that had been opened, and I hit his hand to get it out, so that he dropped the can, and the coins all scattered on the floor. But that was nothing. There were even bigger stories of looting. There were private houses of people here, in like affluent, rich people here in Beersheba. The houses were broken open where there was still food on the table, like literally people left mid-meal. We really have to conclude. I would ask if you have one last question, Munir, and then we can see if we have 2 more minutes left, and that's it. I'm gonna ask in Hebrew, in Arabic, sorry. I understood from your testimony that you continued to attack Beersheba and other villages after the Egyptian forces had already surrendered. Is this true or not true? What was the reason to expel people after the military conflict had already been over? The question was, after the conquering of Beersheba, why did we continue to expel Arab villages? You should learn history. That's my point to you. Not my history, just general history. After occupation of Beersheba, meaning the 21st, 22nd of October, in the entire Negev region, there are 2 villages, Fallujah and Iraq al-Manshia, that were conquered or evacuated or expelled, whatever, 2.5 weeks later. There was no military operations of the expulsion of villages at all after to the best of my recollection. Bedouin tribes, yes, were expelled, but after the conquering of Beersheba, basically the war in the Negev region was over. Afterwards, you know what happened, obviously. Then there was the Chorev operation, where the IDF expelled, got the Egyptians out beyond the canal, pushed them back. But in the Negev region, all of the military operations were over. There wasn't any more operations here. A question from Arela, and then I want my question of my own, and that's it. You describe your participation in battles, in evacuation, expulsion, and so forth. I have one question. Did you personally meet or interact personally with Bedouins or Arab villages that are running away or infiltrating back? Did you have any personal during the war, you mean? During the entire your service here in the Negev, did you meet up with Arabs personally, Bedouins personally? I was looking for trouble. Why should I? At that time, they were fighting me. Yeah, but I'm asking. No. People were expelled. People ran away. Didn't you meet anybody? Look, guys, I think you should understand the general situation. You're not getting it. 1948. On the from the 15th of May all the way to the end of March 1949, that entire until Rashrash was occupied in Eilat, the entire year. Do you remember what Ben Gurion said once? We were one front. The entire country was a front of war for an entire year and a half. Everybody was fighting. Arabs, to me, were the enemy that may kill me. Bedouins as well, although not so much. The Bedouins had a different story. They had their own role to play. And a large number of the Bedouins, no, not a large number, no, actually, but in any case, at least from the Tarabin, yes, from the Tarabin. Also Jabrat, actually, people, 2 tribes, actually remained in the area. There were those who personally ran away. By the way, I wanted to ask our friend who spoke here. We should have asked her. She left. Oh, okay. We should have asked her if she knew that in the 50s and early 60s, the Bedouins of the Negev reached all the way to the center of Israel. Does she know this? Hundreds or thousands of people. Just food for thought. I'd like to ask you one question because we must conclude. We must conclude. one question to Huda. So Huda, and then me. Let me ask a question first that also appears in your testimony, and that is, why do you think that people of your generation at times struggle to tell the stories that you tell? Find it difficult. Why do they not tell these stories? I mean, and then Uda wants to ask a question. Yes. You said that a very small number of the Bedouins were in fact expelled. So how did the 100,000 people, Bedouins, 100,000 people disappear from the land? What was the story? If they weren't expelled, how is it that now they're sitting in Jordan, a million Bedouins, refugees? One question is in regards to the number. Let me tell the audience that the Negev, there was an uprooting of 100,000 Arabs, Palestinian Bedouins. And the second question was, why does your generation refuse or have a difficult time telling this story? And we must be brief, because we must, although it's a fascinating and educational let me answer the first question, and forgive me for telling you that there was not in the Negev region 100,000 Bedouins. There were not 100,000. There were not 100. There were 120,000, and 100 were gone, and now then 20 left. And there wasn't in the Negev area. I'm not talking. He's talking about the south. Uda. We're not here to argue it. And we'll never be able to agree, because you say A, I say B. But you should learn it. Learn the history. Because you yourself began your sentence by saying that 100 or whatever and 1 million Bedouins are sitting in Jordan now. Where did you get this number from? Today it's 1 million. There were 100,000 in 1948. Now there are 1 million. And then they moved to Jordan, and now are 1 million people. I think the dispute is, because I know the testimony is talking about the south in its entirety, of talking about the Negev, which is under siege. We shouldn't get into it right now, but let's talk about the Negev versus the entire south, Majdal and Ashkelon and so forth. By the way, I'm talking about the Bedouin tribes. The choice, talking to me is not the right choice, because I can't talk about other areas. I'm talking about the Negev. I'm talking about the Bedouin territories and the area between the east of the Gaza Strip and west of the city of Beersheba. This area. Okay? Not Ashkelon. I didn't get all the way to Ashkelon. I'm talking about the Bedouin tribes that were between Gaza to Beersheba. That's my question. We're going to leave this, because the question is a question put to historians, a factual debate that must be answered by historians, people who address and research it. He addresses historical research, and we all can't. It's not based on his personal knowledge. Why do you think your generation find it so difficult to testify? But let me tell her, in the territory that you are talking about, 120,000 Bedouins cannot exist. It's an impossibility what you're saying. It's simply not possible in so tiny an area, so large a population. In any case, I would like to tell you of memories, fragments of memories of things that happened. Is a difficult thing to do. Believe me when I tell you that I am perhaps better than, say, the average man of the street, because I not only experienced it, but I also researched these things. But I researched them not from memory, but from documents. Why does your generation refuse to testify? Well, first of all, there's a question of people struggling to remember, because memory is something that really plays with us. Often we repress things that are unpleasant to remember. And tend to reminisce about the things that are nice to remember. So exposing yourself personally, not only on one event, but many events, that's not something that's simple to do. Apart from that, is that I can certainly admit that I have quite a bit of criticism of things that I could. But this is not the forum to talk about it right now, at least. Thank you very much. You're a very courageous man, and thank you to you all. And we're going to stop for coffee, 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back to the last session of the day.